Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Hope you had a great Christmas. We're happy to be back with you. Full confession, this is pre-recorded, though. We recorded this just prior to leaving for a bit of a Christmas break for us. We're going to be very busy and very live all throughout the weekend at various times, and obviously heading into next week in New Orleans, getting that all started. But for today, spending a little more time with the family, but fully loaded for a great show with you here today, too, including off the top coming up in just a moment. I believe, to keep things simple, there's one pretty significant advantage that I think that Georgia has in this game on Thursday that it needs to be ready to take full advantage of. We'll talk about that, and we'll also get into how Kirby is maybe taking some mitigating steps to prevent a potential problem from Georgia emerging as it gets ready in its own preparation. So a lot on Georgia, Ole Miss, and the Sugar Bowl. We are glad to have you with us for it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Kroger, fresh for everyone.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I begin this morning by telling you happy December the 26th. I will tell you that one of the ways in which my life has changed as I've gotten older, you just see things a little bit differently. When I was a kid, even through my teenage years, I feel like I remember this. I used to feel like December the 26th was like the saddest day of the year. You know, Christmas is over, you look forward to it, and now you're just in this blah, wintry state for a while. I tell you, as an adult, I no longer feel that way. I think that December 26th is actually secretly a really good day if you're lucky enough to get a chance to be at home and you're still in that Christmas feeling. Obviously, as Georgia fans, we've got a lot to look forward to with the college football playoff and the Sugar Bowl coming up, that now as an adult, December 26th is really a continuation of the Christmas season. But man, as a kid, I didn't really feel that way. So I hope this show finds you that way. Now, many of you are right back into the work mode, hopping right back into it. And if you are, well, we appreciate the hard work that you're doing and the fact that you would take us with you as you do that. But for those of you who are still in your pajamas, you're still got the Christmas mug out, drinking that second or third cup of coffee, we really appreciate that too, and glad to see you getting a chance to enjoy yourself here a little bit today. I'll also tell you that this weekend on both Saturday and Sunday, we're expecting a lot of coverage from Athens. Georgia has not yet left for New Orleans. They'll be in Athens this weekend. This is different than it used to be in the old days when you had like the full week in the bowl site. Teams spend a little bit more time on their own campuses now than they used to. So Georgia will be in Athens this weekend. We'll be bringing you plenty of coverage from that, including hearing from some Georgia coaches and players. It's going to be busy for us around DawgNation on the website, DawgNation.com, and on the DawgNation video channels. Obviously, this weekend, we hope that you'll be a part of that with us. Now, with that said, let me shift to this here today. I mentioned this to Jake Fromm or Connor Riley or somebody when we last spoke on Tuesday prior to the Christmas season, that I like to keep things simple. We live in this day and age of like ball knowers when it comes to football, and we talk about football as if it's nuclear physics, and there's a certain extent to which diving deep and getting into the granular level and all the terms and the whatever, there's a way to show appreciation for football by getting deep into it. I don't deny that, and I'm thankful that people do that. But for me, one of the things I'm a big believer of in life is that oftentimes the deepest level of understanding comes from when you can just recognize the simple truths. And when you look ahead to the game against Ole Miss for Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, I believe the simplest and the truest truth of all is that Ole Miss playing this game this time without Lane Kiffin is going to be different for them than it was when these two teams played in October. I just believe that Lane Kiffin is a difference-making coach, and not having him in the game against Georgia will make a difference, even if they just got a chance to play last week against Tulane, also without Lane Kiffin. I don't think that completely changes the fact that Ole Miss, without Lane Kiffin, they're going to feel the effect of that against Georgia. Now, will we on the outside looking in notice? Maybe we will, maybe we won't. In fact, it may be a little hard to truly recognize, this can be attributed to Lane Kiffin not being here. Maybe we can't fully recognize that, but I think we ought to be smart enough to know Well, of course, you're not as good with no longer having Lane Kiffin, that the coaching situation for Ole Miss, I think, can be an advantage for Georgia. You can decide for yourself, is it a significant advantage or not? But I do believe it's an advantage. Now, it's fair to point out that Kirby Smart does not necessarily feel this way. When he was asked about the Ole Miss coaching situation, going back to earlier this week and not having Lane Kiffin and what they do have, Kirby Smart was pretty clear that as far as he's concerned, the offensive infrastructure that's in place is actually not all that different from what it was in October, even though Lane Kiffin himself won't be there. This is what Kirby Smart said.
The offensive coordinator and the staff is still all there. So, I mean, they're not going to make overhaul or make large changes, right? They got something that really works well. They got a really high-powered, explosive, great wideouts, really good tight end, one of the best backs in the country, arguably the quarterback that may be playing the best in the country in terms of his ability to make throws in all areas. I mean, the guy's elite. He was elite last time we played him. He's just as elite or more elite now because he's gotten more experience and more confidence. So they're playing at a really high level offensively, and I mean, Lane has something to do with that because he helped build it and get them there. But Charlie's done a tremendous job calling the plays and doing those things.
So with all due respect to Charlie Weiss Jr., who I'm sure is a very good coach, the notion that the Ole Miss offense, that's Charlie Weiss's offense. Y'all, can we just be honest about this? Until Lane Kiffin left for LSU, no one was saying that. Nobody had ever said that. That's not something that's being said. And that's not me trying to, take a jab at him, or it's not even worth taking a jab over. It is just obvious that right up until the point that Lane Kiffin left Ole Miss, this offense was thought to be Lane Kiffin's baby. It just was. And now there's the attempt, and I get what Kirby's doing. Kirby's like, listen, whether Lane's there or not, we got to be ready for anything. And obviously our readiness would depend on us viewing this as no different than any other game that we're going to play, just like it was, the last time he played. I get what Kirby Smart is saying from a readiness standpoint, but there's also, Pete Golding saying, hey, let's not make any mistake about it. Charlie Weiss Jr., it's his offense. He's the offensive coordinator. No one was saying that before Lane Kiffin left. And I'm not trying to tell you that the Ole Miss offense is going to fall apart without Lane Kiffin, but you would like to believe that his absence must mean something. Otherwise, why is he paid so much money? And I don't mean that rhetorically. I mean that literally. If Lane Kiffin is going to be paid, $13 million by LSU, he was paid, huge sum of money by Ole Miss. What is the money for if he doesn't make an impact on game day? I'm not the biggest fan of Lane Kiffin, never really have been, but I'm also honest enough to say I do believe that Lane Kiffin is the kind of coach that has been able to make an impact on game day. In fact, this year when Georgia played Ole Miss back in October, it was actually one of the more fun conversations I think we had during the season. Leading into that game, we talked a lot about what is the individual impact that Lane Kiffin can make on this game. And I remember Cody Chaffins and I were talking before we started recording the show about what Kirby Smart was saying that week. He was like, hey, this is the game we need the crowd to be as loud as it can be because we don't want the quarterback to be able to hear the in-helmet communication. Lane's going to be trying to talk to him. We don't want Trinidad Channels to be able to hear that. We want to really disrupt that because that's what Lane is able to do. And with Kiffin not coaching the Sugar Bowl, once again, I'm not here to tell you, Ole Miss is going to completely collapse because of it. But I do think there'd be a better team if Lane Kiffin was coaching in this game. And in fact, I went back and revisited something we did on the show at the time. Lane had been on Kirk Herbstreit's podcast, and Lane was talking about as a coach, this is way back in October, well before we knew he was leaving for LSU. He was talking about as a coach how valuable he thinks these in-helmet communications are, and as a coach, how it is that he's trying to use that. And you can tell this is how energetic Kiffin is about the opportunity to make an impact during the game. Not the chalkboard prior to the game, not the playbook that was written during the offseason, but the decisions that you're making based on what you're seeing from your opponent while the game is being played. This is what he told Kirk Herbstreit about that, going back to, October? A couple of months ago now. This is Kiffin with Herbstreit.
Yes. As soon as that ball hits the ground, they click it back on.
Incredible.
It goes off at 15, and then it comes back on, right away. So we can get to him really quick.
Okay.
And I think that's been a big thing. I don't know how much it's talked about, but in college football, that we get to do that, but the defense gets to do that too. And I think it's allowed younger or less experienced players to play quick, like quarterbacks. You're seeing, like, look at ours. He wasn't even here in the spring, or sometimes these linebackers may have just transferred in somewhere. Well, when the defensive coordinator talks to him, like, think about Whit Weeks. He got to hear all that stuff. He's got a great coordinator, great player. So they're hearing all the stuff too. And he's telling him, hey, Trinidad's, body language is this, or the left guard's back 6 inches, because they can see that as coaches to tell him, be ready for counter or whatever it is. So it's pretty amazing to think of all that that goes on.
It really is.
The game that was always there, but we couldn't get it to the players. We would just be yelling, hey, it's counter. Hey, Perkins is blitzing. We can tell this tendency, and we can't even get the information to him. Now we literally can say it to the quarterback, and he can tell the right tackle.
So that's what Kiffin says the helmet communications have given them a chance to do. The stuff the coaches recognize on the sideline, we're able to tell that to the quarterback now, because up until there's 15 seconds on the play clock, that's what we're able to do. And Kiffin, we're led to believe, recognizes this stuff in game, the likes of which that not many coaches do. And once again, I'm not trying to disrespect Charlie Weiss Jr. He may go on to be the best coach in college football one day. But for now, we're assuming that he's not as good at recognizing that stuff as Lane Kiffin probably is. And so therefore, for an offense that Kirby described as high-powered and explosive, that just maybe the absence of Kiffin in a game like this makes it a little less high-powered, maybe a little less explosive, and maybe the thing that we can recognize with our own eyes maybe a little bit better, maybe it moves just a half a tick slower, that there's not quite that same precision, which leads to the pace with which Ole Miss can really get you in trouble with. And we probably saw some of that back in October. We do think the absence of Kiffin in this game is probably an advantage for Georgia. Is it a significant advantage? Decide for yourself. But we do think a coach like this not being there, keep it simple, it probably is about as simple as that. You'd like to have Lane Kiffin in this game if you're Ole Miss. But what if I told you there's more going on from the coaching standpoint with Ole Miss than just Kiffin not being there? I find this to be fascinating. So and this has been the story now for a while. So Kiffin leaves, goes to LSU. The initial statement is to all the LSU assistants or the Ole Miss assistants, if you want to come to me to LSU, you better be on the plane with me when I leave Oxford. Otherwise, you can't do it. Well, eventually Kiffin softened his stance on that some. Some of the guys did leave with him. But eventually, Kiffin essentially gave all those guys, this is Weiss, who's going to be working at LSU, other guys from that staff on the offensive side, you can go back and help Ole Miss during the college football playoff. I'm going to give you permission to do that. When their playoff run ends, you're just going to come here and work full time. We've seen something like that happen before. Kiffin gives that to these guys. But this is a situation where you've got Ole Miss and LSU. They're hated rivals against each other. They're also competing for many of the same players in the college, in the transfer portal, and trying to put a roster together. That LSU is all full systems go about trying to get ready for 2026, while a lot of these Ole Miss coaches are still coaching for the Rebels here as 2025 comes to an end. So much so that we've learned this week that the Ole Miss coaches who were with the Rebels during the playoff game against Tulane, the moment that game ended, with this having been a Christmas week and no game this week, the game is next week, the Ole Miss coaches who are going to go work at LSU, the moment the Tulane game was over, they're heading to Baton Rouge. They apparently have not been around the Ole Miss program at all this week, according to what Pete Golding told us earlier this week. This may be a much bigger deal than you can debate, well, Kiffin being there, not being there, how much does it matter? I don't think this is up for debate. I don't think anyway. And I'm not telling you it changes the game. I'm not telling you it turns a loss into a win or vice versa, depending on the perspective you're looking at it from. But my gosh, what if Georgia didn't have half of its coaches this week? What if they were off doing something else? Apparently that is what Ole Miss has been dealing with, and Pete Golding told us that himself earlier this week. Here he is on the coaches on his staff trying to do double duty ahead of this college football playoff quarterfinal round game. This is Pete Golding from earlier this week.
Obviously, we got coaches that have other jobs, like a lot of teams do right now. That they're working two different jobs. So when it's not game week, they're gonna be working the role of their other job, and then when it becomes game week, they're fully invested where they're at. So it's no different than anywhere else.
So I take that to mean, hey, this week's not being game week. That means we haven't had them. And he says, it's not that any different than a lot of other programs. I don't know. Is it? That seems pretty different to me. The biggest game as a program Ole Miss has ever played, and half of its coaching staff is off working somewhere else. And once again, I'd love as a Georgia fan to say this guarantees a Georgia win. I'm not quite so sure I could tell you anything that guarantees a Georgia win. But don't you take that as a decent advantage for Georgia that in a big week of preparation, the Ole Miss coaches who are going to be working at LSU, basically the entirety of the offensive staff, they haven't been there? I take that as a pretty big deal. In that same press conference later on, Pete Golding went into a little bit more detail about exactly what does that mean when the guys who play pretty significant roles in getting ready for the game against Georgia, when for an entire week they're just not there. What does that mean? Pete Golding talked about it.
The first Sunday when all this went down, the next guy that was in the room said, hey, when those guys aren't here, you take this like this is your room. All right, those players are going to be looking for you. They're going to need direction, right? It's a good opportunity for a lot of young guys from an interview standpoint. You run it like you would run it if you were to run a room when they're not here. And then when they're here, it's their room, and it's the same role that you were doing prior for the 2025 season. So that's no different at a lot of them. That's done the same way everywhere.
I'm going to give Golding a lot of credit. He already sounds like a coach in that in describing this situation, to hear Golding tell it, not that big of a deal. If the offensive line coach is here, then he's in charge. And if he's not, then you're in charge. And then when he's back, now you step back in the same role you've been all season long. Golding does a good job of describing this as if it's no big deal. Half of our staff is gone for an entire week ahead of this game, but we're all fine. We've got other people stepping into that role, and we're moving around staff members like musical chairs, but no big deal. It's all fine. Golding does a good job of making it sound that way, and maybe for Ole Miss it really will be that way. Honestly, I think this game is still going to be pretty close. I think the Rebels will still be pretty competitive. I really do. It is certainly not my intent to tell you, oh, man, this is going to be a Georgia blowout, and I'm super cocky, overconfident moving into New Orleans. As a Georgia fan, I can promise you I don't feel that way. I am literally on guard for anything in this game and any other game that Georgia plays in the college football playoff. Anything can happen in this playoff. This was a knockdown drag-out when these two teams played a few weeks ago. Of course that's true. But at a certain point, you also have to just call it like it is. This is a very odd situation for Ole Miss. The head coach that we think is the architect of a lot of what they did, he's not there. And you can debate amongst yourself how big of a deal that is. But when your coaching staff for this week allegedly hasn't been there either, I think that puts Ole Miss in a tricky spot. And I think the challenge involves Georgia exploiting that. The challenge for Georgia is making sure you're ready to take advantage of it. But it is an advantage. I mean, it is something in Georgia's favor that Ole Miss would certainly wish was different. So the job for Georgia as you head towards New Orleans, using every moment to prepare every bit to the highest level you can so you can be the most ready to exploit that advantage, if it does truly exist, when these two teams get ready to face off on New Year's Day. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Kroger. Glad you were with us and hope you were enjoying that lingering day after Christmas feeling. We were talking about that a little earlier, and getting ready for a Happy New Year. And most importantly, hopefully you're getting ready for a big run for Georgia through the college football playoff and a lot of preparation for the Sugar Bowl this weekend and the next week. Man, we're excited about all of that. And we really appreciate our friends at Kroger who make today's show possible. And in so many ways, Kroger makes my Christmas and holiday season possible too. Those last-minute trips, you're running to grab this and grab that. In fact, it feels like the holiday time of year. There's just so much running around and grabbing every single thing you can. And, of course, that means a lot of driving. And a lot of driving means a lot of attempts to refill that fuel tank. And when you're doing all of that, just saving any money you can, obviously, a really valuable thing. Well, that's what our friends at Kroger give you a chance to enjoy. How about becoming a Kroger Boost member? In fact, you can learn more about this online at Kroger.com/boost. That's the website, Kroger.com/boost. And you can learn about all the features and benefits that come your way once you become a Kroger Boost member, including, like I said before, saving money at the pump. How about the stuff that you're already buying at your local Kroger, giving you a chance to save twice as much when it comes to twice the fuel points for the things you're already buying. So More online, Kroger.com/boost. You can also take advantage of free grocery delivery, free pickup, all of that coming your way for being a Kroger Boost member. We think that's a great thing for you to explore as we head towards a new year. Now, speaking of exploring, we're about to explore a bunch of recruiting stuff with Jeff Sentell in a moment, including a couple of things. Thing number one is this. So we're recording this on the Tuesday prior to Christmas, in the midst of just getting ready to put a lid on the pre-Christmas broadcast schedule. There was a little bit of breaking news that Damon Wilson is countersuing Georgia. Georgia announced its suit against Wilson. A lot of you are aware of this. It's related to the contract, if you want to call it that Georgia believes was broken when Wilson left Georgia to go to Missouri. Wilson's legal argument, I believe, is that Georgia was unfairly punitive against him, and they're now countersuing each other. So neither one of us are lawyers, of course, but we're going to talk about how this plays in terms of public opinion and future players and whatnot. We'll do some of that with Jeff Sentell in a moment. Also, Jeff going to give us more details on, most everybody that Georgia signs is now an early enrollee, but just given the hard cap of 105 players, you can't at any point exceed that number. Not everyone gets to go through bowl practices. Some guys probably can from their high school, whatever anyway, but some Georgia players will be are practicing right now. We'll be going with the team to New Orleans. Jeff is going to give us a little bit of an update on some of that here coming up in just a moment, too. Prior to that, though, let's go around the doghouse, presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. Now, here's what we said earlier. We think no Lane Kiffin, divided responsibilities, distractions maybe for the Ole Miss coaches also working in LSU. We think that can be an advantage for UGA. Now, it's an advantage that Georgia needs to take full advantage of, but in just simple language, that can be an advantage. However, the flip side of that is there are also some things that Georgia needs to do to make sure it doesn't give Ole Miss a chance to take advantage of. And one of those things goes back to one of the oldest sports debates there is, the notion of rest versus rust. For teams that have their playoff positioning secure, who maybe either in professional sports don't have to play quite as hard towards the end of the season, or you get the long layoff because of a bye like Georgia has in the college football playoff. How do you take advantage of the rest without veering towards rust, where you're not quite the same team you were when you were playing in the SEC championship? This is something I think the coaches take pretty seriously. Kirby Smart, I think, takes it pretty seriously too, while also this week letting us know that, hey, make no mistake about it, Georgia's glad to have had the time off that it's had. You just want to make sure it's using that time wisely. This is what Kirby Smart said just a couple of days ago.
Yeah, I think it's been good. You have to make it a positive by how you handle it. The positive is the mental practice you get, the recovery you get, the extra lifts you get. The negative is, when you're playing good football, a lot of times you want to keep playing. You want to stay in rhythm. You want to stay in a weekly schedule, and that schedule gets thrown off by the break because we had players taking final exams. We gave the players more time off in terms of before they came back and really started grinding. So you do the best you can with the calendar you have. You try to talk to other people and find out what the best way to do things is. But I'm excited about where our team is. I'm excited that they're practicing the way they are and are excited about the opponent because they have so much respect for the team we have to play.
So I think it's interesting that Smart says, hey, you have to make it into a positive by how you handle it. In other words, and you've probably heard this said before, that in life, very few things are either good or bad. Most things are just about the trade-offs, and there are some trade-offs if you stay in the rhythm of playing each week, and there's some trade-offs of if you get the rest. It's simply a matter of whatever circumstance you have, how do you best leverage them for your benefit? And I think that's what Kirby Smart is mostly talking about right there, making sure that the layoff that Georgia earned because of how it played, it does use it to the full possible benefit here. And to me, this has always been more about as you ramp down physically, as you take a break physically, how do you stay engaged mentally? To me, that's what, and I won't pretend to, to know as much as Kirby Smart does. I'm just saying, when I think about what it must look like, that's the assumption I make, is that you've got to let go a little bit physically. You've got to recuperate a little bit physically, but you better not pull back too much mentally because you forget the competitive edge that you had, that you used to do all the things you did prior to the layoff that Georgia has had. My guess is that's probably what this is all about. Smart also went into more detail about, okay, so, and by the way, it's also nice to hear him say, we're still practicing well. So clearly, to the best that Smart's got a visual cue and a visual clue, you do see that. Looks like they're practicing pretty well right now. And some of the things they're doing in practice, some of the stuff we've heard about other teams doing, the notion of a simulated game. When I say that, I can't help but think about what the Atlanta Braves tried to do in the Major League Baseball postseason a couple of years ago. I hope it works out better for Georgia than it did for the Braves, because they were very worried about their layoff before getting into competitive baseball again. And by all accounts, they seemingly did not handle that very well. But we'll never know for sure if that was the root cause of that early exit or not. But either way, they talked about some of this same kind of stuff in, 2023, and did not quite have it work out the way that Braves fans wanted it to. We believe that Georgia can have it go better for them this time. And when it comes to like simulated games and things like that, Kirby Smart did talk about all the stuff they're doing to make sure their players stay as engaged as they possibly can.
Yeah, we've done the same thing, done simulated games and done situational football, whether that's 2 minute and a half, 4 minute offense, red area, all the different situations you have, and trying to make them more game-like with the anxiety, the crowd noise, the atmosphere, the matchups, and try to go good on good to keep crisp. But at the end of the day, all those simulations are not real games. And anybody that tells you they got it figured out probably doesn't coach long enough to know that it's a lot more about how you play than how you practice leading up to it. You just do the best job you can and try to prepare them.
And look, that last statement that Smart makes, that's one we've made so much, that I do think there's this obsession with what's the perfect path for Georgia. Does it want to play in the first round? Does it want to avoid the SEC championship? Does it want to bite at the quarterfinal? Does it want this? Does it want that? Ultimately, and we've said this so many times, it's really more about how Georgia plays, more so than who it's going to play, when it's going to play them. It's, can Georgia demonstrate itself to be a championship level? Now, in the SEC championship, maybe more so and more emphatically than any point in time this year, that's what Georgia showed that it was. And so how do you take that and bring that with you to New Orleans? As Kirby said, no coach really knows for sure. But the fact that Georgia has shown that it has that top gear, well, maybe finding that again once you get to a Nolan, this Sugar Bowl, maybe that really is a possibility. Either way, it sounds like the Georgia practices have been intense. It sounds like this team's pretty fired up. As Kirby said, even with no Lane Kiffin, whatever else, there is still great respect for this opponent. And we certainly believe that Georgia's going to do everything in its power to make sure it's as ready to go as it can be when January 1st finally gets here. We'll also make that Around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at Zagoria Law. Now, we hope the Georgia Bulldogs take a big old bite out of Ole Miss, but I don't want any dogs taking a bite out of you. And oftentimes, and it's a sad story, but listen, owners don't take proper care of their animal. Animal gets loose. All of a sudden, havoc gets wreaked. It's a terrible thing, and it can create tremendous injury and tremendous pain and suffering. And if you or someone you love has been impacted by a situation like this, we think you deserve your chance to fight for compensation like any other personal injury situation. And we think you'd be wise to choose an attorney that has chosen to really specialize in this narrow aspect of personal injury law. They literally, in this case, I mean literally, not figuratively, but literally, they literally wrote the book on how to win these types of cases, meaning they wrote a book about all this stuff. That's how much they know. They want to put that knowledge to work for you, so find them today online, ZagoriaLaw.com, ZAGORIA, ZagoriaLaw.com, or give them a call, 833-GA-DOGBITE, dog spelled conventionally, D-O-G, 833-GA-DOGBITE. Check out our friends at Zagoria Law, and if you or someone you love been injured by a dog, bitten by a dog, sad, sometimes scary story, but we think it can have a happy ending for you if you fight for the compensation you deserve with our friends at Zagoria Law by your side. Great to have them as a part of Around the Doghouse. Great to have all of you, and great to have our next guest, UGA recruiting, what's going on with Damon Wilson, getting ready for New Orleans, all of that, including some early enrollees, already doing just that. Let's talk to Jeff Sentell here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Jeff Sentell, kind enough to join us. We're pre-recording this just before Christmas, obviously airing for you on the day after Christmas. So Jeff squeezing us into his busy holiday season here right now. We're thankful for that. Jeff, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate you being here. And if you don't mind, we'll jump right into the discussion. Obviously, as folks are hearing our show, Georgia's finishing touches on its practices Saturday and Sunday before making its way to New Orleans on Monday. And as you've been reporting at DawgNation.com, good number of the 2026 class, most of them early enrollees. Some also get their chance to go through these practices. And yet, I guess you've got, the hard cap of 105 players that can't be exceeded here. So what impact does that have on who gets to practice now and who doesn't? I'm sure for some guys it's also their own high schools that maybe have some impact on this too, of who's going to be here now, who's going to wait till the second semester when it begins. Give me a little bit of an idea of some of the guys that will be going through practices here right now.
Brandon, so it's basically with the early enrollees, what they've had to do is it's kind of a little bit different. I don't know if anybody technically understands the A to Z, but they have to adhere to the 105-man limit. And what that means is that's the new roster sizes. So the way it's been referred to me is like positions where Georgia needs a few more healthy practice bodies, a running back, a safety, a wide receiver, defensive line in certain spots. Coincidentally, Brennan, these are a lot of Georgia's perhaps most impressive recruits and signees, where I just don't think in years past where we saw 20, 25 early enrollees that go through bowl practices on the sideline for the Sugar Bowl. I don't know if it's going to be as pronounced as it was in previous years. Basically, it's kind of funny. A lot of the players, a lot of the Georgia signees have referred to it as basically getting the call, kind of like you're a AAA baseball player and getting a call up to practice with the team. Tyreek Green is a great example at safety. Keeping going on down the line, Craig Dandridge, Jay Lamar at wide receiver and running back respectively. Ekene Ogboko, the only five-star offensive tackle in the class, the first one that Georgia has signed since Mims in 2021. He was at the Army-Navy All-American game, All-Star game this week. He's going to report to Georgia on December the 25th. So it's a lot of the really heavy hitters. Zakai Helton, who was a star of the 6A state championship game, he reported early. So did his Carrollton teammate Ryan Mosley. So you got a smattering of guys that you may be considered the elite, maybe the most physically ready, that have been able to come in early and go for practices. As an example, Graham Houston, I think, is a great example out of Buford. I believe he's Georgia's third highest rated offensive lineman in this class, but he's been basically put on a schedule that he can show up in Athens on January the 8th next month, always after the Christmases, obviously after the Sugar Bowl. So it's kind of a little bit different than years past.
Yeah, it is. And for the players to get a chance to do this, obviously ceremonial, it's one of those things we've looked forward to. Now, it's also interesting when the media gets to go to these practices, and we think we may have a chance to see some of it. They won't really be easily recognizable because their names are on the roster, and the jersey they're wearing, I guess, is whatever practice jersey they happen to have lying around. But how valuable is it in terms of what will eventually become Georgia careers for these players, getting a chance to go through this, getting a chance to travel, getting a chance to see Georgia in its postseason best, hopefully? How valuable does this end up being for a lot of these players?
Creates a lot of welcome to college football and welcome to Georgia moments, Brandon. I'll never forget Oscar Delp telling me, he gets thrown in there and he's got to block Michael Williams. That's sort of a welcome to the degree of difficulty getting ratcheted up a little bit. I think some of the bodies will be able to spot 6'6" Caden Prothro. I'd be very curious to see if he's working with Todd Hartley's group right now or whether he's working with the wide receivers, because his eventual position fit will depend on his weight. Like if he's under 230, 240, he's probably going to be a receiver, kind of like in a Noah Thomas mold. But if he gets over 240, 245, then he'll be more of a traditional tight end. I think one or two guys that will be really easy to spot are some of these physical marvels. Ekene Ogboko is one of those, 6'6", about 295, and he looks like he's about 250. And also Valden Sohn, the Swedish import, we're going to call him, who was actually ranked a 5-star by 24/7 Sports. he's just going to have so much twitch at that interior defensive line position, kind of like Devontae Wyatt type twitch, that he'll probably be very easy to spot as well.
Yeah, should be interesting to see. We also had a very volatile quote from Kirby Smart earlier this week as it relates to the next phase and the roster management part of being the Georgia football coach, which is the transfer portal is going to be open. Georgia's certainly going to have some guys leave. We also have this world around college football right now where USC, for instance, is making an announcement about the players that it's keeping. Other guys will obviously announce when they do transfer. Kirby this week had a very volatile statement, which was, hey, why don't you announce that you're committed to getting better? Which I think is obviously a very funny thing. And Kirby Smart says that very well. But as someone like yourself who interacts with so many future Georgia players and recruits on the recruiting trail, the brand of Georgia as a place where development does take place. You come to Georgia for this reason. You'll be a better player on the other side. You'll have a chance to have a longer NFL career because of it. How much do you think that brand still works, that message, that imaging? How much do you think that still works in a day and age in which, in a lot of cases, it seems like it's much more about the NIL certainly than it used to be for some guys? How much does the message that Kirby Smart emphatically stated this week, how much does that still work?
But I think it's a pretty strong pre-screening process. And what I mean by that is if when they start recruiting a player, if those NIL questions come up, visit 1, visit 2, then Georgia's basically going to go hard stop and say, this is not going to work out if we're already talking about NIL. So they basically wade through those types of players. And there's a type of player, Brandon, and the roster's full of them, including this signing class, that they put a price tag on development. In lots of cases, Brandon, I hope our audience looks at it. Your audience, the DawgNation reader, the DawgNation viewer looks at it and says, I pine for the days when these guys came to Georgia and played for free just because they wanted to be dogs. Well, the modern interpretation of that kind of attraction is they're taking hundreds of thousands of dollars less, sometimes even per season, to be Georgia Bulldogs. And there's a hidden factor in that money equation there, that compensation equation, Brandon. And what it is, simply put, is the development process. There's a lot of players that put a price tag and they have a fair market value of maybe the Georgia development's probably worth upwards of $200,000, $300,000 per year because, look, there's schools that are offering them a ton more money, and these recruits have heard over the years, if they're offering you more money, that means they're trying to make up for something else. And Georgia's offer, while they try to be fair with respect to the revenue share numbers and their overall hard ceiling in terms of a cap, they want to make sure these players know that they're going to compensate them and compensate them very well. But part of that is they can look at the linebacker position, the safety position, the offensive tackle position, the tight end position, and they can realize that Georgia's putting guys in the NFL on an annual basis, pipelining those guys there where, you know, big school U or big check U hasn't had a draftee at that position in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years, sometimes even a decade. And that sort of stuff, Brandon, it still actually balances out.
So you're obviously, as we're recording this, running around, I'm sure, doing plenty of stuff with your family for Christmas. You may not be aware of this. This is relatively late breaking news that it was announced, just part of the SEC championship, that Georgia was going to sue, basically, Damon Wilson over what it felt like was a breach of the contract it had with him from an NIL standpoint, recuperating money as was written in the contract because of the fact that Wilson, after signing it, chose to then move on to Missouri. Well, we've now learned on this day, we're recording this on a Tuesday afternoon to air on Friday, that Wilson is countersuing Georgia, essentially, and I'm not a lawyer, won't pretend to be, but essentially, I guess, alleging that the payback penalty in this contract is essentially a punishment, which lawyers will say that it can't be written as a punishment. It can be a recuperation for lost benefits, but it can't be a punishment, I guess some lawyers are going to say. Either way, we've got Damon Wilson and Georgia now battling it out in court with suits against each other. What do you make of this? I guess most specifically how this is going to play in the world of talent acquisition, be it with transfers or recruits, that Georgia's drawing a hard line here and Wilson's going to fight back against UGA too.
Yeah, I think you used a good term there, Brandon. I think it's a beachhead. And what it is, from the jump, when the first lawsuits went back and forth, I kind of thought this would eventually reach a settlement. A settlement would be maybe non-disclosed, but a settlement was going to happen. But really, it's a beachhead for all future contracts that Georgia signs. Brandon, most do not know this, or it's not really well publicized, but this time of year, especially last week, was a time when Georgia went through renegotiations for a lot of their players. If a kid was a freshman and now he's a freshman starter perhaps, or a freshman key contributor, that compensation factor goes up and deals are agreed to and terms are shared. And lots of times, it results in a healthy raise for a contributor, a guy like Juan Gaston, for example, a guy like Dontrell Glover, for example, players that maybe played above their previous salary standing or their NIL standing going forward. And what this is really is it's a beachhead again, because this is really a lawsuit for all future ones, because a lot of college football programs are looking at this one because they're happy Georgia fought it. Whereas if you're going to develop a player and give them more money, well, then there needs to be some sort of protection for the university in terms of if somebody wants to come and then pay them a little bit more. I think it slows down a little bit now, Brandon, because there's only going to be one transfer portal window going forward. But what they're trying to do is perhaps protect their investments of the players. Damon Wilson had a great year this year, but I think a lot of that was due to the fact that he got developed at Georgia against future NFL players for 2 years, and Missouri's scheme allows him to be a tactic quarterback, and that's much more a bigger metric for NFL scouts to take a look at, big sack numbers, where he wants to go in the first round. And, perhaps he looked at it and thought he wasn't going to get those numbers, those opportunities, those same type of sack totals at Georgia. Perhaps not. That's probably a legitimate theory right there. And so he made the move to Missouri, where he could kind of hunt the quarterback more on a down-to-down basis.
Let me follow up on that. And neither one of us are lawyers, of course, but let me see if I can put what the legal argument for Georgia is in non-lawyer speak, and tell me if you think this sounds right to you. That Georgia's argument against Wilson and in court on behalf of itself, I believe, is not so much going to be we're mad that Damon Wilson left us after signing with us, as much as it's going to be we're mad that he misrepresented the fact that he wanted to be here, and by going down this road with him, signing him to this contract, compensating him some, but more importantly, taking us, the program, out of the ball game for negotiating for other players who play Wilson's position. We missed out on all those guys because Wilson told us he wanted to be here. Therefore, we negotiated with him as if that's what he wanted. For him to later break that contract and move away, it's not, well, we're mad you signed and now you're leaving. It's, we're mad you told us you wanted to be here and now we missed out on all these guys that we could have gotten. Once again, I'm not a lawyer, but trying to read as much about this as I can, I believe that's essentially the essence of Georgia's argument. Does that sound, whether it's, a winning argument in court, I won't pretend to know, but does that sound right to you? That's basically what Georgia's saying here?
Brandon, that's some pretty good lawyering right there. I guess you must have stayed in your favored premium hotel brand last night. I think that's a lot of it. Another way that I look at this, Brandon, is you've got to have some sort of deterrent for people to come get your guys. And, in Damon Wilson's case, if we remember that story accurately, was that he wanted to end up, perhaps at an Ohio State, which was a school that courted him heavily coming out of high school. And Georgia won that recruiting race right there. And I believe in my mind that it took some compensation to do so. And then what you do now is if these players want to transfer without penalty, well, there's going to be the ability to transfer is fine, but there needs to be something there to protect the schools that have invested in these schools. And I would imagine that with the 400,000 number, which was kind of, tossed about, I kind of feel that was something where a school was like, all right, you have to pay $400,000 to acquire him out of his NIL deal with Georgia, and then you're going to have to pay him a very strong lump sum per year. And maybe that would cause some schools to back off the table and protect the original school that spent 2 years developing. Mind you, Brandon, when Kirby Smart made those poster eyes comments this week about, I want you to announce that you're developing, you're getting better. Well, he did that for 2 years against 2 years for Georgia, and now that kind of protects Georgia from him jumping to a competitor.
All right, I got one more thing I want to ask you about before we let you go. Let me remind folks before that, though, obviously a big part of what we do here on DawgNation Daily each week and a huge part of the college football playoff, our friends from Dr. Pepper. In fact, if you're heading towards New Orleans this weekend to see Dr. Pepper all over the place, big part of the Sugar Bowl, big part of the college football playoff. That is what they are all about, and I love it, man. The great taste of Dr. Pepper is something I've enjoyed for a very long time. And when I'm thinking about getting together and watching college football, hanging out with folks, you better believe that is something I love very much too. So as you're getting stocked up, maybe you're watching the game at home, maybe you're enjoying some New Year's with friends, think about the rich, one-of-a-kind flavor of Dr. Pepper. As your local Kroger, wherever you're doing your shopping, pick up some Dr. Pepper today, because when it comes to Dr. Pepper, DawgNation Daily, the college football playoff, it's a Pepper thing. We love having them as a part of what we do. All right, Jeff, before we say goodbye to you, so we're in an interesting spot. Georgia back in the Sugar Bowl for a second straight year. Obviously, a year ago, a trip that was fraught with emotion, whether it be the terrorist attack that's been well documented, probably not as much lately as it should be, but nonetheless, obviously the situation with Kirby and his father, which obviously continues, I'm sure, to be a very heavy thing on their minds. We certainly understand that. And there's also this thought of, for something that's been a traditional relationship, SEC champ goes to the Sugar Bowl, with the future of the college football playoff and in some form or fashion, more folks calling for more home games, maybe these quarterfinal round games eventually being played on campus too. What's your emotion about what Georgia has experienced in the Sugar Bowl, both long-term, near-term? The fact that weeks like this may not happen very much in the future, given the fact that we may be on the heels of some pretty big change. What is your overall feeling about what's about to happen for Georgia in New Orleans, given what happened a year ago, and what the future might look like in this sport?
Yeah, Brandon, that's a big question. I guess, first of all, the thing kind of pertinent to my mind on that in that space is we're recording this on Kirby Smart's birthday, his 50th birthday. So the first place my mind goes is him returning to the Sugar Bowl. And I think Chris Lowe put out a really great piece this week about Kirby because, most might initially think that that's going to be tough for Kirby and his family, returning to the same team hotel, returning to the French Quarter, returning to the same bowl where he lost his beloved father a year ago. Well, one of the things that story showed is that that's actually where his father, Sonny, and his mother had their honeymoon. So, and that's where Kirby played his last NFL game as an Indianapolis Colt, kind of trying to make that roster, and all the many times he's been not only for Georgia but for Alabama to play in Sugar Bowls over the course of his career. So it's very much a mixed feeling of good and bad there for the Smart family, and it's great that they'll have family supporting his mother for that week as well. And that's the first thing. The other big thing, Brandon, is we've got to come to some accord about protecting the integrity of certain bowl games while also, everybody's got an opinion on this, Brandon. I think if these playoffs keep expanding, we're going to get into bigger debates out of who's the 16th seed and the 15th seed. And, everybody says take the top 12 and then take some G4 representation, or maybe let G4 play-in games. Football and the NCAA tournament are completely different entities in my mind. I don't think they need to try to create another 16 seed knocking off a 1 seed, or a 16 seed knocking off an 8 seed with a lot of these games, because by and large, as everyone saw with James Madison and everyone saw with Tulane, these teams are just basically built differently. They're constructed differently with pay scales, resources, rosters, the type of athletes, the NFL production. To put them all in the same sphere competing for the same championships, I think it feels disingenuous to the G4 schools as well. This is one of those rare years where I think 4 teams would have been fine. I think 8 teams would have been fine as well. I can have all these noble arguments and bullet points about all this, Brandon, but at the end of the day, this is all a vehicle to sell advertising for entertainment programming. Let's not forget this, but at the same time, let's not dilute this product so much where you have basically empty stadiums, or you have schools, everybody deciding what they want, that they'd rather go Christmas shopping on a Saturday night rather than watch a couple of first round playoff games. I think the spirit of all this is getting diluted a little bit, where you watch a game and people wonder whether the point spread is going to be 21 or 31 points. That to me does not feel like playoffs.
Jeff, great stuff. Hope you are having a great holiday season with your family. Can't wait to see you in New Orleans. And obviously, we appreciate your insight on everything that Georgia's doing to get ready for that, with a lot of future dogs getting their first taste of practice action year 2. Thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger, and we will look forward to talking to you again very soon.
Hey, BA, appreciate it. Happy holidays, everybody. Have a good one.
Indeed.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, great stuff from Jeff Sentell. We'll get ready to do our SEC Through here in a moment as we look ahead to the upcoming weekend, man. There's actually a lot of college football bowl action on tap. We're going to preview a good bit of that. But speaking of on tap, prior to that, let's also give you a shout out to our friends at Mercier Orchards Hard Cider, because at your favorite restaurant, you might can enjoy the great taste of Mercier Orchards Hard Cider on tap. In many restaurants, that's the case. And when you go to your favorite restaurant, if you love the category of beverage known as the hard cider, or if it's a brand new thing for you, you should probably say, hey, BA from DawgNation Daily has been talking about Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. Do you have that? Could you get it? I would say ask for it at your favorite beverage store, your local supermarket, whatever else. Just tell them you want to enjoy the great flavor of this Georgia-grown company right up there in the Blue Ridge Mountains, up there in Blue Ridge, Georgia, with the couple of hundred rolling acres. It's gorgeous. The fruits are just grown so perfectly. They're blended together. They make an entire array of flavors. There's an option, I think, for you that you're going to really love, whether it's in the can, on tap, whatever else. Ask for it by name. Tell folks you want to try Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. We think you're going to love it. So more online, mercier-orchards.com/hard-cider. Mercier is spelled Mercier. Make sure you check that out today. All right, let's get ready to do an SEC Through. A couple of SEC teams in action for bowl games this week. I'm going to try to keep this relatively rapid fire here for a moment. First of all, you got the game in Yankee Stadium at noon on Saturday. This is Penn State Clemson. So funny to think both these teams essentially started in the top 5 to begin the year. Now they're playing in the, what do you call it, the Pinstripe Bowl or whatever else, here at noon on a Saturday on December the 27th. Obviously, the caveat here is it's very difficult to know what any of these teams are bringing to the table. So it comes back to, reverting back to what you thought you knew before the season began. Oftentimes, that's as good a guide as anything. On paper, before the year began, Penn State was thought to be slightly the better team. They're actually getting points in this game. I'll take the Nittany Lions against Clemson, getting things started there on Saturday. At the Pop-Tart Bowl at 3:30 in the afternoon, I think this is a very big game for Georgia Tech, not just because they want to celebrate with the Pop-Tart. They got the Pop-Tart stuff on their helmet, you may have seen. But we've had Chris Weinke calling plays for Georgia Tech in this game with Buster Faulkner on his way to Florida. I think, now I don't know for sure, but I think Weinke's going to be the offensive coordinator, right? I mean, look, Brent Key's done a great job with Georgia Tech, but we think the real success there has mostly been because of Buster Faulkner. And if Weinke, and I mean this with all due respect, if Weinke's the replacement for Faulkner, that's a tricky position for Weinke to be in. And this bowl game against the BYU team, but my guess is probably pretty fired up and ready to play. More so than some of these teams that just have a million opt-outs. My guess is BYU probably has less of that. Maybe I'm wrong, but my guess is they're probably a little bit more into this than some others might be. Against a good team, your first day as play caller for Georgia Tech. Now, you've still got Haynes King at quarterback. I believe he's playing. But this, I think, is a pretty big storyline for a Tech team that's been in the top 25. What are they without Buster Faulkner? And it's Chris Weinke, who, by the way, I mean, as a coach, he's not that young. I mean, to be honest with you, he was darn near 30 when he was playing. So, I mean, he's been around for a while. If he's a great offensive coordinator, then how come he already wasn't? Because he's had a chance to be that and hasn't been that yet. With Tech, he may get his chance. But, boy, hard to imagine that he's just going to pick up right where Buster Faulkner left off. Maybe he does. Hard to imagine that he will. I'll also mention a couple of other games here, too. You get to the later part of the day, get a couple of SEC teams in action. Missouri against Virginia. This is the Gator Bowl, I think. This is the Gator Bowl. Missouri and Virginia in the Gator Bowl. Here's as close to analysis as I have on this. Missouri did beat Ohio State in a bowl game a couple of years ago, so I think they probably take these kinds of games more seriously than some SEC teams do, especially when Eli Drinkwitz he's the coach that's not going anywhere. He's re-signed. My guess is he probably wants this one. And they've won bowl games before. They've already had probably a better season than I think they were given credit for. They certainly exceeded expectations for the most part by how they played. For a team that's won bowl games in the past, my guess is they probably have a decent level of motivation against Virginia. And Virginia, on the flip side of this, I mean, Virginia would have been in the college football playoff had they beaten Duke, and they couldn't even do that. So I can't imagine they're doing anything other than just falling flat in this spot there on Saturday night. I'll also mention Houston and LSU. This is late. That's the Texas Bowl, very late, 9:30 local time, 9:15 start. There. Houston's going to have more of a home state advantage here. LSU, very weird situation where their interim coach is about to go work at Ole Miss. They're a mess. But once again, let's revert back to preseason expectations. There's a lot more talent in place at LSU than there is in Houston. I know that Houston would love, because remember, Houston and Baton Rouge are not that far apart. This is a very big deal for Houston to play LSU. They got the entire motivational edge here. They're in their own state, in their own city too, NRG Stadium. That's Houston. The Texas Bowl is in Houston. So they're playing in their city against an LSU team. There's a lot of LSU fans in Houston. There's a lot of energy around this. LSU still got better players. I'll take LSU in this spot over Houston, but it's a pretty full day of action when it comes to bowl stuff on Saturday. And in addition to that, DawgNation will be covering live all the press conference stuff on Saturday and Sunday as Georgia gets ready for its trip to New Orleans. There'll be plenty of stuff of that coming up on the weekend too. So please stay close to DawgNation. We have got a lot going on, and we are ready to bring it all to you. But for now, we'll make that your SEC through. And as we say goodbye here today, obviously, normally it's a golden shoe here in this spot. We'll go ahead and just give you all a golden shoe as a way of ringing in the new year here very soon, and the invitation that you'll stay close with us this weekend as we're covering everything around Athens as the Dogs get ready to make their way to New Orleans. We're also going to be here on Monday. Now, we're still not 100% sure what that's going to look like, but it's going to be a really fun show based on what we see in Athens this weekend, I mean to say. Hearing from some coaches and some players, we'll get you ready for those final thoughts before Georgia gets on the plane, goes to New Orleans, and then starting on Tuesday, we are in New Orleans all the way through what we hope is a big win in the Sugar Bowl, and then a trip to Arizona after that for the Fiesta Bowl, which would be Georgia's first ever appearance in that bowl game. So big week coming up. Stay close to DawgNation for all of that. And as Georgia's enjoying all of this, we got to keep our mind on those less fortunate. How about the lousy, stinking Gators? They got nothing like this in their life right now. In fact, it's been 1,875 days since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great weekend. We'll see you on video looking at some of the Georgia practice stuff and the press conference and all the updates from Athens. And then back here Monday for DawgNation Daily presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. Showing up on time, doing the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. All right, so obviously we're not live today, so there will be no live comments for us today. But I do want to take just a special moment to say thank you for those of you who do give me the great privilege of speaking to you each and every day. Hopefully you're interacting with each other. I'm sure you are. No doubt arguing about 19 different things if it's a normal day. But I can't wait for a great week coming up, getting ready for the Sugar Bowl, talking about all of that. I'm just so excited. Just can't wait for it. It's going to be a great time. And it's a chance for Georgia to get a very big win. And listen, before you think about national championship or anything like that, would you join me in saying, wouldn't it be nice to see Georgia just advance further this year than it was a year ago? That'd be a pretty nice next step on whatever this turns out to be. So getting that win against Ole Miss, big deal. For the next few days, we're going to talk a lot about how that's going to happen. So continue to enjoy your Christmas season, getting ready for a happy new year. And of course, a big thanks to R.S. Andrews, who makes the R.S. Andrews Cool Down possible. So if you've got a plumbing emergency, reach out to them. Water heater needs to be replaced. In many cases, they can do it for you the same day. Find them online at rsandrews.com. Enjoy the weekend. Back here Monday, DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll look forward to talking to you then.